The little girl stood in the middle of the road, her bare feet sinking into the wet asphalt. Rain poured down in relentless sheets, soaking her thin nightgown and plastering her dark hair to her face. In her arms, she clutched a teddy bear, its fur matted, its once soft fabric stiff with dried blood. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight ahead as if she were in a trance. Officer Elliot Kane slammed on the brakes, his patrol car skidding to a halt just feet away from her. His heart pounded as he threw the car into park and stepped out, the rain instantly drenching his uniform. "Hey, sweetheart," he called, his voice barely audible over the storm. "What are you doing out here? Are you okay?" The girl didn't respond. She didn't even flinch. Elliot crouched a few feet away, his training kicking in. Kids didn't just wander into the street in the middle of the night, especially not in a storm like this. Something was wrong. "Very wrong. Can you tell me your name?" he tried again, his voice softer this time. Still nothing. Her grip on the teddy bear tightened, her small fingers digging into its stained fabric. Elliot's eyes dropped to her feet, dirty, scraped, and bleeding slightly. She hadn't walked far, but the blood on the bear, that was another story. "Where's your mommy and daddy?" he asked, scanning the empty street. The houses were dark, their windows like blank eyes staring back at him. No lights. No movement. Just the rain and the girl. For the first time, she reacted. Her head tilted slightly, her wide eyes locking onto his. Her lips parted, and in a voice so faint it was almost swallowed by the storm, she whispered, "They're still in the house." Elliot's blood ran cold. He followed her gaze to a two-story home at the end of the street. The porch light was off, the windows dark. But the front door, it was wide open, swaying slightly in the wind. "Stay here, okay?" he said, guiding her toward his patrol car. She didn't resist, but she didn't acknowledge him either. He helped her into the back seat, buckling her in before closing the door. The rain drummed against the roof as he turned back to the house, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of rain and something else, something metallic. Elliot's stomach twisted as he approached the open door. His hand hovered over his holster, his pulse quickening with every step. The smell hit him the moment he stepped inside: blood. His flashlight swept over the entryway. Shoes lined up neatly by the door. A coat draped over a chair. A family photo on the wall. Everything looked normal. Except for the smell. Elliot moved deeper into the house, his boots squelching on the wet carpet. The living room was a mess, a lamp knocked over, picture frames shattered on the floor. And then he saw it. A trail of blood leading down the hallway. His stomach churned as he followed it, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The kitchen was worse. A woman lay slumped against the wall, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the grout between the tiles. Elliot's jaw tightened. He forced himself to breathe, to focus. He scanned the room, no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture. Just blood. A noise creaked overhead. Elliot's head snapped up. Someone was upstairs. His grip tightened on his weapon as he moved back into the hallway. The stairs loomed ahead, a dark ascent into the unknown. He took them one at a time, his heart pounding in his chest. At the top of the stairs, a soft glow spilled from a partially open door. Elliot moved toward it, his breath steady, his grip firm. He pushed the door open and froze. A man lay on his back near the foot of the bed, a gunshot wound to his chest. Blood had seeped into the carpet, dark and thick. His face was twisted, frozen in a grimace. And beside him, two smaller forms, a boy and a girl, their bodies still, their faces pale. Elliot's stomach dropped. He took a step back, his mind racing. Who were these people? And why was the little girl in his squad car the only one left alive? Elliot's radio crackled to life, snapping him out of his daze. "Unit 7, backup is 2 minutes out. What's your status?" He stared at the bodies, his mind racing. The man, the woman, the 2 children, all dead. And the little girl in his car, clutching that blood-stained bear, was the only survivor. What the hell had happened here? This is Unit 7, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I've got a 10 to 54. Multiple fatalities. I need forensics and an ambulance for a minor. Over. The dispatcher confirmed, but Elliot wasn't waiting. He moved quickly through the house, his flashlight sweeping over every corner. The place was eerily silent, save for the creak of the floorboards beneath his boots. He checked the other rooms, a bathroom, a study, a child's bedroom, but found nothing out of place. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Just death. When he returned to the kitchen, he crouched beside the woman. Her hand was curled into a fist, and something glinted between her fingers. Elliot pried it open carefully. A key. Small, brass, and unremarkable, except for the fact that she'd been clutching it like her life depended on it. He pocketed the key and stood, his mind spinning. Who were these people? And why had they been targeted? He glanced at the family photo on the wall, a smiling couple with 2 children. The boy and girl upstairs. But the little girl in his car, she wasn't in the picture. Elliot's stomach twisted. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Elliot stepped back outside. The girl was still in the back seat of his patrol car, her hands wrapped tightly around the teddy bear. She hadn't moved. Hadn't made a sound. It was like she was frozen in time. Elliot opened the door and crouched beside her. "Hey," he said softly. "I need you to talk to me, okay? What's your name?" Her eyes flickered toward him, but she didn't speak. Her face was pale, her cheeks smudged with dirt. She looked so small, so fragile, but there was something in her eyes, something hollow, like she'd seen too much for someone her age. Elliot reached for the bear. "Can I see this again?" Her grip tightened, but after a moment, she let him take it. He turned it over in his hands, running his fingers along the uneven stitching. The blood was dry now, but the weight of it still felt wrong. He pressed his thumb against the bear's belly, feeling for the lump he'd noticed earlier. It was still there, small, solid, and definitely not part of the stuffing. "What's inside this, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice gentle. She didn't answer, but her eyes widened slightly. Elliot's gut told him this wasn't just a toy. It was evidence. The sound of sirens cut through the night. Backup had arrived. Elliot stood, clutching the bear, and waved the approaching officers over. "We've got a crime scene inside," he said quickly. "4 fatalities. Secure the area and call forensics. And get an EMT over here for her." As the officers moved into action, Elliot turned back to the girl. "I'm going to find out what happened," he promised. "But I need your help. Can you tell me your name?" For a long moment, she was silent. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost missed it, she said, "Lucy." Elliot's breath caught. "Lucy," he repeated. "Is that your name?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "Okay, Lucy," he said, crouching down to her level. "Do you know what happened in that house?" Her grip on the bear tightened again, and she shook her head. But Elliot wasn't convinced. She knew something. She had to. While the forensic team processed the scene, Elliot returned to the house. He pulled the small brass key from his pocket and studied it. It didn't look like a house key. Too small. Too old. Maybe a locker key? Or a safe. He moved through the house again, this time searching for anything that might fit the key. He checked drawers, cabinets, even the garage, but found nothing. Frustrated, he stood in the living room, staring at the family photo on the wall. The smiling faces mocked him. Who were they? And where had Lucy come from? Then he noticed something. The bookshelf in the corner, it was slightly askew. Elliot moved closer, running his hand along the edge. There were scratches on the floor, like it had been moved recently. He grabbed the shelf and pulled. It swung open with a low creak, revealing a hidden door. Elliot's pulse quickened. He inserted the key, and the lock clicked. The door opened into a small crawl space, barely large enough for an adult to squeeze into. Inside, he found a thin mattress, a few empty food wrappers, and a stack of children's drawings taped to the wall. The air was stale, but the space had clearly been used, and recently. Elliot's stomach churned. Someone had been hiding here. Someone small. Lucy. He grabbed one of the drawings and held it up to the light. It was crude, done in crayon, but the image was clear, a woman and a little girl holding hands. Scrawled underneath in uneven letters were the words, "Mommy and me." Elliot's mind raced. Lucy wasn't part of the family in the photo. She'd been hidden here. But why? And by whom? He flipped the drawing over. On the back, in the same childish handwriting, was a single word, "Help." Elliot stepped out of the crawl space, his mind reeling. He needed to talk to Lucy again. But as he approached the patrol car, he saw Detective Mara Lawson stepping out of her unmarked vehicle. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. Elliot had worked with her before, and he knew she didn't waste time. "What do we have?" she asked, her voice clipped. Elliot handed her the drawing. "4 dead inside. And her." He nodded toward Lucy. "She's the only survivor. I think she's been hiding in that house for a long time." Mara studied the drawing, her expression unreadable. "You think she's connected to the victims?" "I don't know," Elliot admitted. "But she's the key to this. We just have to get her to talk." As Mara took over the scene, Elliot returned to Lucy. She was still clutching the bear, her eyes distant. He crouched beside her again, holding up the drawing. "Lucy," he said gently. "Did you draw this?" She nodded, her fingers tightening around the bear. "Who's this?" he asked, pointing to the woman in the drawing. Lucy's lips trembled. "Mommy." Elliot's heart sank. "Where is she now?" Lucy didn't answer. But her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she looked like the child she was, scared, alone, and broken. Elliot reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to find her, Lucy. I promise." Detective Mara Lawson stood in the dimly lit crawl space, her flashlight sweeping over the cramped, dusty room. The thin mattress, the empty food wrappers, and the childish drawings taped to the walls told a story of survival and fear. She turned to Elliot, her expression grim. "She's been here for a while," Mara said, her voice low. "Months, maybe years. But why? And who was keeping her here?" Elliot shook his head, his mind racing. "I don't know. But that bear she's holding, it's not just a toy. There's something inside it. Something heavy." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Let's find out." Back at the precinct, Elliot and Mara watched as a forensic technician carefully cut open the teddy bear. The room was silent, the air thick with anticipation. The technician peeled back the fabric, revealing a small, rectangular object wrapped in plastic. "What the hell is that?" Mara muttered. The technician unwrapped the plastic, revealing a USB drive. Elliot's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a child's toy, it was a hiding place. A desperate attempt to keep something safe, Mara plugged the USB drive into her laptop. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single folder labeled Evidence. Inside were dozens of files, photos, documents, and audio recordings. Mara clicked on the first file, and a grainy video began to play. The footage showed a man in a suit sitting at a desk, his face obscured by shadows. His voice was calm, almost bored, as he spoke. "The Grayson case is a liability. If he goes public, it's over. Make sure he doesn't." The screen went black. Mara and Elliot exchanged a look. "Grayson," Mara said slowly. "As in Daniel Grayson?" The federal prosecutor who was murdered 3 years ago? Elliot's mind raced. Daniel Grayson had been investigating a high-profile corruption case before his death. The official story was that he'd been killed in a robbery gone wrong, but Elliot had always suspected there was more to it. And now, this video, Lucy, Elliot said suddenly. Her last name is Grayson. She's his daughter. Mara pulled up Daniel Grayson's case file on her computer. The details were sparse: a home invasion, a single gunshot wound, no suspects. But there was one detail that stood out: Grayson's wife and daughter had vanished the same night he was killed. They were presumed dead, but no bodies were ever found, until now. Lucy's been hiding for 3 years, Elliot said, his voice tight. Someone's been after her this whole time. And now they've found her. Mara leaned back in her chair, her expression dark. This isn't just about Lucy. It's about what her father knew. And whoever killed him is still out there. Elliot and Mara spent the next few hours poring over the files on the USB drive. The evidence was damning: photos of bribes, recordings of incriminating conversations, and a list of names that included some of the most powerful people in the city. Daniel Grayson had been building a case that could bring down an entire network of corruption. And now, someone was tying up loose ends. We need to find Lena Grayson, Mara said, her voice firm. If she's alive, she's the only one who can fill in the gaps. Elliot nodded. And we need to keep Lucy safe. If they're willing to kill an entire family to get to her. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mara made a call to an old contact in the FBI, and within hours, they had a lead. Lena Grayson had been spotted 2 years ago in a small town just outside the city. She'd been living under an alias, but a traffic camera had caught her face. Elliot and Mara drove through the night, the rain hammering against the windshield. The town was quiet, the streets empty. They pulled up to a small, run-down house on the edge of town. The lights were off, the windows dark. Elliot stepped out of the car, his hand resting on his holster. "Stay behind me," he said to Mara. They approached the house cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The front door was unlocked. Elliot pushed it open, his heart pounding. The house was empty. The furniture was covered in dust, the air stale. But in the kitchen, they found something: a child's drawing taped to the fridge. It was the same as the ones in the crawl space: a woman and a little girl holding hands. The words "Mommy and me" were scrawled underneath. Elliot's stomach twisted. She was here. But where is she now? As they searched the house, Elliot's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're too late." He showed it to Mara, his jaw tightening. "They're watching us." Before Mara could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. Elliot spun around, his flashlight sweeping the room. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the storm. "Elliot Kane," the man said, his voice cold. "You should have stayed out of this." Elliot's hand went to his holster, but the man was faster. A gunshot rang out, and the world went black. Elliot woke to the sound of rain. His head throbbed, and his vision blurred as he tried to sit up. The room spun, and he realized he was lying on the floor of the abandoned house. Mara was beside him, unconscious but breathing. The man in the doorway was gone. "Mara," Elliot said, shaking her gently. "Wake up. We need to move." She groaned, her eyes fluttering open. What happened?" "We were ambushed," Elliot said, helping her to her feet. "They're on to us. We need to get out of here." Mara nodded, her expression hardening. "Where's Lucy?" Elliot's stomach dropped. He hadn't thought about it until now. If the people who killed Daniel Grayson were still after Lucy, she wasn't safe at the precinct. He pulled out his phone and called the officer he'd left in charge of her. "This is Kane," he said quickly. "Is Lucy still there?" There was a pause, and then the officer's voice came through, tense and urgent. "She's gone, sir. Someone took her." Elliot's blood ran cold. What do you mean, someone took her? A man in a black SUV, the officer said. He had a badge. Said he was from Child Protective Services. We didn't think, Elliot cut him off. Which way did they go? Northbound on the highway. About 10 minutes ago. Elliot hung up and turned to Mara. They've got Lucy. We need to move. Now. They raced to the car, the rain soaking through their clothes. Elliot took the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he sped down the empty highway. The storm had worsened, the rain coming down in sheets, but Elliot didn't slow down. He couldn't. Mara pulled up the GPS on her phone, tracking the black SUV's last known location. They're heading toward the industrial district, she said. There's an old warehouse there. It's abandoned, but it's the perfect place to hide someone. Elliot nodded, his jaw clenched. Call for backup. We're not waiting. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows and crumbling walls a stark contrast to the modern city skyline. Elliot pulled into the parking lot, his headlights cutting through the darkness. The black SUV was parked near the entrance, its engine still warm. Elliot and Mara stepped out of the car, their weapons drawn. The rain muffled their footsteps as they approached the warehouse. The door was slightly ajar, and Elliot pushed it open slowly, his flashlight sweeping the interior. The warehouse was vast and empty, save for a few rusted machines and stacks of old crates. But in the center of the room, under a single flickering light, was Lucy. She was tied to a chair, her small frame dwarfed by the ropes binding her. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't cry out. Lucy, Elliot whispered, his heart breaking at the sight. We're here. We're going to get you out. Before he could move, a voice echoed through the warehouse. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Elliot spun around, his flashlight illuminating the figure standing in the shadows. It was the man from the house, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cold, calculating expression. In his hand was a gun, pointed directly at Elliot. You've been a thorn in my side, Kane, the man said, his voice calm. But this ends now. Elliot's grip tightened on his weapon. Who are you? The man smirked. Let's just say I'm the cleanup crew. And you're the mess that needs cleaning up. Mara stepped forward, her gun raised. Let the girl go. This doesn't have to end badly. The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. It already has. You think you can stop this? You think you can win? You're just a couple of cops in over your heads. Elliot's mind raced. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and running out of time. But he couldn't let Lucy die. Not like this. What do you want? Elliot asked, stalling for time. The man's smirk widened. The same thing I've always wanted. To tie up loose ends. And you, detective, are the loosest end of all. Before Elliot could react, the man fired. The shot echoed through the warehouse, and Elliot dove for cover, pulling Mara down with him. The bullet ricocheted off a metal beam, sending sparks flying. Stay down. Elliot hissed, his heart pounding. Mara nodded, her eyes scanning the room for an escape route. We need to get to Lucy. Elliot glanced at the chair where Lucy was tied. She was only a few feet away, but the man was blocking their path. They needed a distraction. Elliot reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He quickly typed a message and hit send, hoping it would reach the backup team in time. Then he turned to Mara. On my signal, he whispered. We move. She nodded, her grip tightening on her weapon. Elliot took a deep breath, then shouted, Hey! Over here. The man turned, his gun swinging toward Elliot. In that split second, Mara lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The gun went off, the shot echoing through the warehouse, but Mara didn't let go. She wrestled the weapon from his hand and slammed it against his head, knocking him unconscious. Elliot rushed to Lucy, his hands trembling as he untied the ropes. You're okay, he said, his voice breaking. You're safe now. Lucy looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. They took Mommy. Elliot's heart sank. What do you mean? They took her, Lucy repeated, her voice barely a whisper. They said they'd hurt her if I didn't go with them. Elliot exchanged a look with Mara. Lena Grayson was still alive, and she was in danger. As they carried Lucy to the car, Elliot's phone buzzed. It was a message from the forensic team. They'd analyzed the USB drive and found something, a list of names, all connected to a powerful private security firm called Blackthorn Solutions. Mara's eyes widened as she read the message. Blackthorn? They're tied to government contracts. High-level stuff. If they're involved, then this goes way deeper than we thought, Elliot finished, his voice grim. Lucy tugged on his sleeve, her small hand trembling. They're going to hurt Mommy. Elliot crouched down, looking her in the eyes. We're going to find her, Lucy. I promise. Elliot and Mara sat in the precinct's dimly lit conference room, the USB drive plugged into Mara's laptop. The screen displayed a list of names, politicians, corporate executives, and high-ranking officials, all connected to Blackthorn Solutions. The private security firm had its fingers in everything: government contracts, defense deals, and even law enforcement. This isn't just corruption, Mara said, her voice low. This is a full-blown conspiracy. And Daniel Grayson was about to expose it. Elliot leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. And now they're cleaning up loose ends. Lena Grayson, Lucy, they're not safe until we take these people down. Mara nodded, her expression grim. But we can't do this alone. We need evidence. Solid, irrefutable evidence. Elliot's eyes fell on the teddy bear sitting on the table. Lucy had refused to let it out of her sight, even after they'd removed the USB drive. There was something about it, something that didn't sit right with him. The bear, he said suddenly. There's more to it. I can feel it. Mara raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Elliot picked up the bear, running his fingers along the seams. It's heavier than it should be. Even without the USB drive. There's something else inside. With Lucy's permission, Elliot carefully cut open the bear again. This time, he found a small, folded piece of paper tucked deep into the stuffing. He unfolded it, his hands trembling as he read the handwritten note. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Mara leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the note. What the hell, the note continued, Blackthorn is everywhere. They've infiltrated every level of government. Daniel's evidence is hidden in a safe deposit box at First National Bank. The key is with Lucy. Keep her safe. They'll stop at nothing to silence her. Elliot's stomach dropped. The key, he muttered. The one we found in the crawl space. Mara's eyes widened. It's not just a key. It's the key to everything. They drove to First National Bank, Lucy in the back seat clutching the bear. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy with clouds. Elliot's mind raced as he parked the car. If Daniel Grayson's evidence was in that safe deposit box, it could bring down Blackthorn, and everyone connected to it. Inside the bank, Elliot handed the key to the manager. We need access to this box. Now. The manager hesitated, glancing at Lucy. I'll need to verify, this is a matter of life and death, Mara interrupted, flashing her badge. Open the box. The manager nodded, leading them to the vault. He inserted the key into the safe deposit box and stepped back. Elliot opened the box, his heart pounding. Inside was a thick manila envelope. He pulled it out, his hands trembling as he opened it. The contents spilled onto the table: photos, documents, and a flash drive. Mara plugged the flash drive into her laptop, and the screen lit up with files. This is it, she whispered. This is everything. The files were damning. Photos of bribes, recordings of incriminating conversations, and a detailed list of Blackthorn's operations. But what caught Elliot's attention was a single document, a contract between Blackthorn and a high-ranking government official. The terms were clear: eliminate Daniel Grayson and anyone connected to his investigation. Elliot's jaw tightened. This is bigger than we thought. This goes all the way to the top. Mara nodded, her expression grim. We need to move fast. If they find out we have this. Before she could finish, the bank's alarm blared. Elliot spun around, his hand going to his holster. What the hell? The manager rushed into the vault, his face pale. There's a man outside. He's demanding access to the safe deposit box. Elliot exchanged a look with Mara. They're here. They grabbed the evidence and rushed out of the vault, Lucy close behind. The bank's lobby was empty, but through the glass doors, Elliot could see a black SUV parked outside. A man in a suit stood by the door, his hand resting on his holster. Back door, Mara said, her voice tight. Now. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the empty bank. The back door led to an alley, but as they stepped outside, they were met with the sound of engines revving. 2 more SUVs pulled into the alley, blocking their exit. Elliot, Mara said, her voice steady. We're out of options. Elliot's mind raced. They couldn't fight their way out, not with Lucy in tow. But they couldn't let the evidence fall into Blackthorn's hands. Give me the flash drive, he said suddenly. Mara hesitated, then handed it to him. Elliot crouched down in front of Lucy, his voice gentle. Lucy, I need you to be brave, okay? Take this and run. Find a safe place and hide. Don't let anyone see you. Lucy nodded, her eyes wide but determined. She took the flash drive and clutched it tightly. Go, Elliot said, pointing down the alley. Now. Lucy turned and ran, her small frame disappearing into the shadows. Elliot stood, his heart pounding. He turned to Mara. We'll hold them off. Mara nodded, her grip tightening on her weapon. Let's finish this. The men from the SUVs stepped out, their weapons drawn. Elliot and Mara took cover behind a dumpster, their breaths coming in short, sharp gasps. You're outnumbered, one of the men called, his voice cold. Give us the evidence, and we'll let you live. Elliot's jaw tightened. Go to hell. The first shot rang out, and the alley erupted into chaos. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, the sound deafening. Elliot returned fire, his aim steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Mara took out one of the men with a well-placed shot, but there were too many of them. They were pinned down, their options running out. Then, from the other end of the alley, came the sound of sirens. Backup had arrived. The men from the SUVs hesitated, then retreated, jumping into their vehicles and speeding away. Elliot and Mara stayed behind the dumpster, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. We need to find Lucy, Mara said, her voice urgent. Elliot nodded, his heart pounding. She's smart. She'll find a safe place. They searched the alley, calling Lucy's name. Finally, they found her hiding behind a stack of crates, the flash drive clutched tightly in her hand. She looked up at them, her eyes filled with tears. You came back, she whispered. Elliot crouched down, pulling her into a tight hug. I told you we would. Elliot, Mara, and Lucy sat in a secure FBI safe house, the evidence spread out on the table in front of them. The files from Daniel Grayson's safe deposit box were damning: photos, recordings, and documents that exposed Blackthorn Solutions and their high-level collaborators. But they weren't safe yet. Blackthorn's reach was vast, and they'd stop at nothing to silence anyone who threatened their operation. We need to move fast, Mara said, her voice tense. If we don't get this evidence to the right people, it's over. Elliot nodded, his eyes on Lucy. She sat quietly, clutching the teddy bear, her face pale but determined. She'd been through so much, but she hadn't broken. Not yet, Lucy, Elliot said gently. We're going to make this right. But we need your help one more time. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. What do I need to do? We need you to tell us everything you remember, Elliot said. About your dad. About the men who took your mom. Anything that can help us stop them. Lucy hesitated, then nodded. I remember. I remember the night Daddy died. There were men in suits. They had guns. Daddy told me to hide, but I saw them. I saw their faces. Elliot's heart ached for her, but he pressed on. Can you describe them? She closed her eyes, her small hands tightening around the bear. One of them had a scar. Right here. She pointed to her cheek. And another one, he had a tattoo. A snake. Mara's eyes widened. That's Gerald Vance. He's one of Blackthorn's top operatives. If we can tie him to Daniel's murder, we can bring the whole thing down, Elliot finished. With Lucy's testimony and the evidence from the safe deposit box, they had everything they needed to expose Blackthorn. But they couldn't do it alone. Mara reached out to a trusted FBI contact, Agent Devin Marks, who agreed to help them take down the organization. We'll need to move quickly, Marks said over the phone. Blackthorn's already scrambling to cover their tracks. If we don't act now, they'll disappear. Elliot nodded, his jaw tight. We're ready. The next morning, Elliot, Mara, and a team of FBI agents stormed Blackthorn's headquarters. The building was a fortress, but they had the element of surprise. The agents moved in quickly, securing the perimeter and arresting anyone who resisted. Elliot and Mara made their way to the top floor, where Gerald Vance's office was located. They kicked open the door, weapons drawn, but the room was empty. Damn it, Mara muttered. He's gone. Elliot's eyes fell on a computer on the desk. The screen was still on, displaying a list of names, high-ranking officials, corporate executives, and law enforcement officers. All of them were connected to Blackthorn. We've got them, Elliot said, his voice tight. This is everything. As they were leaving the office, Elliot's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you've won? You're too late. Before he could react, the building shook with the force of an explosion. Elliot and Mara were thrown to the ground, the sound of crumbling concrete and shattering glass filling the air. Elliot. Mara shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. We need to get out of here. They stumbled to their feet, coughing through the smoke. The building was collapsing around them, but they couldn't stop. They had to get out. As they reached the ground floor, they saw him, Gerald Vance, standing in the middle of the lobby, a detonator in his hand. You should have stayed out of this, Vance said, his voice cold. Now you'll all pay. Elliot raised his weapon, but Vance was faster. He pressed the detonator, and another explosion rocked the building. Elliot and Mara dove for cover as the ceiling caved in, trapping Vance under the rubble. When the dust settled, Elliot and Mara emerged from the wreckage, battered but alive. The building was gone, and with it, most of Blackthorn's operations. But the evidence they'd collected was safe, and Lucy's testimony would ensure that everyone involved faced justice. Months later, Elliot sat in a courtroom, watching as Gerald Vance and his collaborators were sentenced to life in prison. The evidence had been overwhelming, and Lucy's testimony had sealed their fate. For the first time in years, Elliot felt a sense of peace. After the trial, he found Lena Grayson waiting outside the courthouse. She looked tired but relieved, her arms wrapped tightly around Lucy. Thank you, Lena said, her voice breaking. For everything. Elliot nodded, his throat tight. I'm just glad it's over. Elliot watched as Lena and Lucy walked away, their heads held high. They'd been through hell, but they'd survived. And now, they had a chance to start over. As he turned to leave, Mara approached him, a small smile on her face. You did good, Kane. Elliot shrugged. We did good. Mara nodded, her expression softening. What now? Elliot glanced at the teddy bear in his hands, the one Lucy had given him as a thank you. Now, he said, we make sure nothing like this ever happens again.